The Integrated Gas Handling Facility of the Nigerian Petroleum Development Company, a subsidiary of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, is designed to deliver 200 million standard cubic feet of gas to the domestic market. And this is in conformity with the federal government's gas utilization agenda, which seeks effective utilization and monetization of the nation's gas resources. For decades, Nigeria could not maximally utilize her huge gas resource base, which currently stands at over 202 trillion cubic feet of proven gas reserves, an additional 600 trillion cubic feet of undiscovered gas potential, owing to infrastructural deficit. But all that is history now, as the federal government, within the last 5 years, has enabled the activation of a gas agenda, which is not only focused on provision of much-needed gas infrastructure backbone, but also carefully designed to achieve effective gas penetration to stimulate the national economy for higher levels of productivity. Now we are being joined by Israel Aye, Senior Partner, Primera Africa Legal, and Director, Aspen Energy. He will be addressing the commissioning later today of the Nigerian Petroleum Development Company's gas handling facility. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Israel Aye. Thank you for joining us. Well, we understand that the president will be inaugurating or launching the Integrated Gas Facility, NPDC, tomorrow. What are the advantages? How will this boost the nation's economy? How strategic is this initiative?
Well, thank you very much. The Integrated Gas Handling Facility, which is about to be commissioned, I hear you say tomorrow. I'm not sure if it's tomorrow or today, but
it's today? Okay.
Or tomorrow. It's a very significant development in the nation's economy. And perhaps to give this a little bit of context, to help us understand what we're saying, to help us understand the significance of what is happening, is if we think of this in the context of what is now known as the energy transition. Effectively, the world is undergoing what is known generally as the energy transition. And the timeline is beginning to emerge. I mean, if you asked a few persons a couple or so years ago what this meant, they probably wouldn't be able to, to put some sort of framework, time frame to it. But essentially, we are beginning to get a sense of what the sunset for oil as a dominant component of the energy mix is. And we're probably looking at anywhere between 10 to 20 years as an export commodity, okay? So what it means is that the development of gas as the transition fuel becomes even more important. I mean, before now, gas development was seen as a nice to have, something we did not to waste natural resource. But it's become a survival issue for us now. And the HF is just such a perfect model of what we're talking about. I mean, you have to think about the fact that the feedstock for the gas, for the Integrated Gas Handling Facility, is otherwise flared, okay? Now, what we've done is to harness what was otherwise going to waste in the economy, and we're deriving, such tremendous value from it. In the construction phase alone, over 100 persons were employed. In steady state, it is going to be employing up to 350 persons directly. And we're not talking about the indirect value add to it. It's going to be earning across various product components, an annual earning of about $300 million. $300 million. I mean, you have to think about the fact that the alternative to this otherwise would have been zero, not to mention the environmental and health implications to the country. So on every level, when you think of this and look at it, it is a significant project. And NNPC, once again, has scored a first. I'll probably leave it there for now.
Well, as the world's 9th largest gas reserve country, this is long overdue. And one will wonder if the distribution infrastructure in place will be enough? How sustainable is this? The gas will now be available in commercial quantity, we are hoping. But what does this mean for gas pricing as well? What does this mean in terms of domestication and penetration in the country?
Excellent question. Indeed, you know, one of the arguments I make every time I have the opportunity to do so is that we have historically not really had a petroleum industry, or perhaps a very nascent petroleum industry. What we have had historically really is an extractive industry, you know, because of the export orientation of the hydrocarbon economy for us. It's really been a rent regime where we simply have a toll gate, we collect revenues at the export level, and there's not much value add to it. And that's your question essentially, to say, look, and in order for us to be able to have a petroleum industry, you know, what do we need? We need domestic utilization, we need indigenous participation. Now, your question, in my opinion, focuses more on what you might refer to as domestic, on domestic utilization. With respect to gas, you can't think or talk about domestic utilization of gas without adequate infrastructure. So what has happened? There is, and there are two ways to look at it. And you know, when you talk about gas as well, it's not one product. Gas is just the general terminology, but there is LPG, there is propane, there is methane, there is pentane, you know, a variety of components that have different kinds of use. The gas that many of us are familiar with is LPG, the liquefied petroleum gas, which is used for cooking. Now, this particular plant is going to be producing approximately 16 20-ton trucks on a daily basis. And the beauty of that is, if you're talking about delivering dry gas to, say, power stations, then you're probably looking more at a pipeline infrastructure that can take gas from where it is to where it ought to be, or where the demand exists. In that respect, a number of critical infrastructure have been put in place. The existing infrastructure, which is the Escravos-Lagos pipeline system, is being doubled in terms of capacity. As far as I'm aware, I think it's almost near completion. The east-west connection, which is called OB3, is also in rapid progress. And we recently saw the very dedicated effort that was put into the so-called AKK, the Ajaokuta-Kaduna-Kano pipeline system, which takes gas from where it is very abundantly available to markets, untapped markets within the country. So in terms of infrastructure, we see those efforts. But there's another way you can actually deliver gas. And those are modular systems, and which is the beautiful thing about the IGHF. You know, it's a modular system that extracts elements of the gas that are usable within the immediate environs. I would anticipate that, you know, the Benin, Warri, you know, immediate environs would have very good supply of LPG at the very minimum, and then it's close to the Alps system that where the dry gas can be injected into to then go to a nearby power station. So what do we need to do? We need to continue to expand the infrastructure network internally, and we also need to continue to explore, you know, modular systems, you know, self-contained systems where you can knock off the various products within the gas for domestic utilization. But remember what I said earlier on, that it is not an option anymore, one, to flare gas, or indeed not to invest, you know, in gas as a transition fuel going into the future. Otherwise, we will be caught napping when this transition comes upon us.
Well, Mr. Aye, we'll take a short break. When we return, the conversation with you will continue. Please stay with us. The morning show here on the Arise News channel. Still with us is Israel Aye, Senior Partner, Primera Africa Legal, and Director, Aspen Energy. Well, thank you for staying with us, Mr. Israel Aye. We'll continue with the conversation. Rufai, over to you.
The IGHF will reduce gas flaring. I mean, that's a common thought. I'd like to know how it will reduce gas flaring. Do you also think this will... the launch of the project is set to meet the 2030 gas flaring deadline. And by extension, there have been many efforts, you know, to be able to reduce gas flaring that have not worked in this country. like the seeding of, trapped gas and things like that, and some other schemes by the federal government. Why will this be different? Will this be a silver bullet, or to just be a step in the right direction and reducing glass flaring?
Thank you very much. Yes, when I talked about the impact of this particular project with respect to gas flaring, I wasn't in any way suggesting that alone was going to harness all gas that was being flared, except that the feedstock, and I mean, as you're aware, there are two major sources of gas, essentially. There is associated gas, which is gas that is produced in association with oil, and then there is the so-called non-associated gas. By the way, there was a data point that was presented earlier on about Nigeria being the ninth, being in the ninth position in terms of gas reserves, which is put at about, not sure when 133 trillion cubic feet of gas per day. A very notable thing there is that the bulk of the gas that we book or have banked would be gas that is found in association with oil. There's not a lot of gas that we have actually brought on stream or in fact booked in the so-called non-associated gas. So that's a different, a separate talking point. But my point essentially is that this particular project is, the feedstock is gas that would otherwise have been flared. Yeah, and the significance for me is that these then can become a model for existing flares as well as future projects. And that's probably the point to make. And there's a dedicated gas flare reduction program. People have bidded for those. It hasn't gone on. I don't know why. This is probably a good point to bring that up again and really just then hold up. And the way I like to look at the GF and the Integrated Gas Handling Facility is as a model, not as a silver bullet. It's a model. It's a great example of what we can do with gas. It is not the solution in and of itself. And the reality is that we would require significant investment from the private sector in order to be able to maximize the potential of gas or our hydrocarbon economy. In that respect, I like what has happened. Government through the NNPC has done what you might refer to as an anchor investment and have established models like putting your money where your mouth is. But it's important to make the point that whatever adjustments we need to be making in the area of policy and law to attract investment will be very much welcome.
Well, Mr. Aye, let me ask you, there are community issues with relation to oil and gas all the time. So what message do you have for the neighboring communities where this multi-million-dollar project will be sited, considering the fact that, look, it's not just enough to talk about ending gas flaring and value added. I have a value added for the host communities.
That's an excellent point. I mentioned something much earlier about my characterization of what we have had historically. And it's not just an academic postulation or just flying a red herring when I said that we have had historically an extractive industry rather than a petroleum industry. Now, what's the point? When you have a petroleum industry, it is the connection to the economy, both local and the national economy, that really characterizes it as such. I mean, until recently, the contribution of the hydrocarbon economy to the national economy was a meager 3%. Today, it's gone up a little, but I think it is still under 10%. Some of the sectors that are not even much touted or talked about contribute significantly more to our GDP. Why? Because of the historical orientation, which is export. Now, remember I mentioned that this particular one is going to increase LPG consumption within the Edo Delta and environs area. It's going to create employment. It's going to create employment and economic opportunities for people around there. Then, in terms of direct employment, this is estimated to employ at least another 350 people. Now, if you flared that, or indeed spiked it into oil and exported it, you will get nothing of that benefit. And that's the point, is that if we have gone down the route, and the point I'm making essentially is that we need to pivot, the oil economy from an export-focused economy to a value-added economy. That very pivot by itself creates benefits locally in terms of jobs, in terms of economic opportunities to the locality. We have seen that community assistance and development in and of itself is not sufficient to deal with the benefit transfer issues. Of course, there are deeper issues around that. And again, I've been involved a bit with the benefits transfer conversation at different levels, and this is not what this is about. But the the Integrated Gas Handling Facility is a model of how we should look at oil and gas development going forward, pivoting from export focus to value-added processes locally in terms of process, refining, and the likes of it, and those who create multiplier benefits and effects within the economy. And my take is that if the local economy prospers, the national economy prospers, then that will be that will go a long way in attenuating some of the discontent in the economy. People hear about the sort of significant value that is being exported from their environments every day, but they don't see it, they don't feel it. This is different. The people are going to see it, they're going to feel it, and hopefully, the CSF component will complete the loop. And I would like to think that there will be harmonious community existence in that part.
Mm. Well, earlier I mentioned, apart from infrastructure, I did mention pricing. I know you dealt extensively about the infrastructure that the government has put on ground in the last 5 years to shift from oil to gas. But talk a bit more on the gas pricing issue. Does this provide the solution to the issue? Because it's a big issue for, those in the industry. It's a complaint for them.
So the gas pricing issue, essentially, the gas pricing issue has two, it probably has two, call it major components. And maybe the most significant is the fact that particularly when you're talking about dry gas, which goes to power, the problem with that is power is regulated. So it is not what they call cost reflective. So if you are in the business of gas supply, you are not able to guarantee recovery of your price because your off-taker, the person who buys from you, is not able to charge a cost reflective price and may not be able to pay your price for gas. So that's a disconnect and a dislocation essentially within gas pricing. From a technocrat's point of view, as somebody who's involved with policy and those kinds of conversations, ultimately we will have to we'll have to find a solution to that. Maybe we'll need to think about a different way of subsidizing power. Maybe we should do so by direct subsidies to those who can't afford to pay cost-reflective prices. But to put a subsidy regime blanket upon that commodity is not sustainable going forward, and it is going to impact negatively on gas production. Of course, if you're controlling gas price at the downstream, then you also perhaps cannot impose, a tax regime that is economic. So it's a double whammy, and those are some of the problems that people are encountering with gas. However, with respect to this particular development, there's probably not a huge gas pricing issue. The reason being that it's an integrated project. So it is the same people that are producing the gas, they're producing the oil, that are recovering the gas that is flared and monetizing it. So this particular project will not have a pricing challenge, and which is why I have recommended it as a model for gas development around the place, particularly with the streams of gas that have enough liquid, and the sort of gas specifications that this one has. I admit that it isn't every gas stream that has the same components or attributes, you know, but majority of the gas that is produced in the Niger Delta have those attributes, and so the integrated gas handling facility can be a model.
Okay, I mean, this is quite exciting, and I'm really very concerned about gas, but I'm also concerned about the community interface, and I'll rehab on that question. You said you create 350 jobs. I want to know how. I've seen projects like this, and I've seen how they've gone. I remember in Otugewe, Otorogu gas plant. I saw how that went. It got to a stage that a lot of people will come out to say that they've not benefited from projects like that, and it became a means of attack. What would you do differently as regards community interaction in this?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that completely. Is your question?
What would you do differently as regards community interaction in this regard, you know, to ensure that those 350 jobs go to the people in the community and they can benefit from this?
Okay, I mean, what I spoke to effectively will be the data points that has been shared. And you would have noticed from my introduction that I don't work for either an NPC or the NPDC. So those kinds of specific response I would have to pass. Okay. However, that said, it's a gas plant, okay? And as a facility, it will employ people. The available data to us that it will employ this many people, a mix of skilled and unskilled labor. It's almost what we then say the facts do speak for themselves. The gas, however technologically advanced, will need to be manned by people. I mean, those are some of the images on your, I'd like to think those are some of the images on your screen. So you would imagine that that facility will employ that many people. In my experience, and by the way, I used to work for one of the international oil companies prior to my present work life, and I'm aware that in that particular population, a specific number of employment opportunities are usually reserved for the locality. Again, I don't have that sort of ratio. But it's a good question. I would recommend that we put that specifically to the NNPC management and the NPDC management particularly, and that way we all can hold them accountable.
Well, very quickly, if you can manage it in less than 60 seconds. This year has been discussed, has been declared the year of gas in Nigeria. Do you think that we're making progress with that? How can we take maximum benefit out of this?
In this respect, I'd like to echo what the managing director of the NLNG said, that, again, you know, we're very good with naming years, almost like, you know, New Year and all of that. But it's amazing what, I mean, people tend to overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in a decade. This year would not be sufficient for us to realize gas. In terms of a start, I think it's a great start, but we would need consistent investment across a 5 to 10 year period, including what I said earlier, creating the framework to incentivize investment, you know, in order to be able to attain, you know, our potential.
Quite correct. Thank you very much, Israel Aye, for joining us on The Morning Show.